Moggcast, a fortnightly conversation with Jacob Rees-Mogg about the topics of the day.
Welcome to the 65th Moggcast. This is Paul Goodman, editor of Conservative Home, in conversation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. And Jacob, this will undoubtedly be the most sombre Moggcast we've done because it takes place in the wake of the killing of David Amess. So, a simple question at the start. Did you know him well?
I knew him in the way that one knows other MPs with whom one is on friendly terms. So we weren't godparents to each other's children or anything of that kind. But David was one of those people who had a lot of friends and was very easy to be friendly with.
When I was in the Commons, there wasn't really a network of Catholic MPs, though I do remember David asking me at one point if I would go with him and others on a visit to the Vatican. As I think, among all the many other things he did, he was chairman of the all-party group on the Vatican. Did you know him in a Catholic context specifically, or really not at all?
No, I went along to the APPG for the Holy See, and he organised various events, things with the papal nuncio, and so on. So I knew him in that Catholic context, and probably saw as much of him in the Catholic context as in the Eurosceptic context, where, of course, I was in touch with him too.
How would you describe him as a parliamentarian?
He understood and loved Parliament and realised that it was the place where you get things put right for your constituents. And I think his understanding of Parliament is the one that I personally think is the right one, that it is your platform. But what is a platform for? It is a platform to seek redress of grievance for your constituents and hold the government to account. And he was absolutely effective at using the chamber to highlight things that were important to his constituents, whether they be individual constituency cases that led to his concern about endometriosis, or in promoting his constituency, or in taking up challenges for individual members. He was one of the most regular attenders at business questions. In the last couple of years, I've been leader of the House, where he was always pushing for Southend itself and for the individuals he represented within Southend.
Just on that note, do you think Southend will be made a city? Which was his eternal campaign, as it were.
And he did it brilliantly. I mean, I think I sometimes answered him on Southend being a city at business questions when he hadn't even mentioned it, because he always mentioned it, and therefore I thought I ought to say something even if he didn't. It is hard to think of a more fitting tribute, but it's not my decision to make.
Shock and surprise are not the same things. I was shocked when I heard the news, but somehow, given Joe Cox's murder, I was somehow not surprised. Did you feel like that, or did you feel differently?
I think I was surprised as well. A number of safety measures have been put in place since Joe Cox's murder. The Speaker, as Chairman of Ways and Means beforehand, did a great deal of work to help MPs improve their own security. And as an MP, going around in one's constituency, I've always felt extremely safe. And so that this should happen in Southend to somebody everybody liked is a surprise as well as a shock. And when somebody dies, it is right that they are praised. The thing about David is that it's true. He was kind to everybody. You know what politics is like. There are some people around who take notice of you when you have a position but aren't so interested when you don't. David was kind to the most junior MP and the most senior MP. He didn't differentiate. He was interested in people. He was thoughtful. And therefore, of all the people who could possibly have been so brutally murdered, David was not someone one thought it could possibly happen to. And he was adored in his constituency, as all the comments coming out now show. But I went to speak for him in Southend, in the Ivor Hall, which is where at one point he had always held his surgeries. And it was so apparent that the people who had come along, and it was a general meeting rather than an association meeting, absolutely loved him. He was very, very popular in his area.
There's reason to think that his killing, like that of Joe Cox, had a strongly political element. We obviously can't say more because we can't get into the business of prejudicing any possible trial. But does that possibility make a lot of the conversation that's taken place about MPs and abuse and threats on social media, does it somehow make it somewhat otiose? Because there's been a lot of commentary, quite rightly, about the treatment of MPs on social media since the killing, to which we will return. It does look at least possible that this particular killing had nothing much to do with abuse, threats, trolling, and all the rest of the stuff that some MPs have received on social media.
I wonder, you were elected in 1997. 2001, and you were in Parliament until 2010. And you've written about this, about how things have changed since you left. And see, when I got in, social media was still pretty limited. And I do think it has created an atmosphere of greater feeling that it's all right to be unpleasant to people passing by in the street. I think the problem is that social media normalizes abuse, and therefore people feel that it's perfectly reasonable to shout something across the street, of which I don't think there was an awful lot prior to 2010. And so I don't think you can make direct causal links, and I think one should be very careful about that. On the other hand, the political atmosphere has unquestionably been soured by the abuse that social media has legitimized. And I'd go slightly further than that. I think it's very important that the written word is more powerful than the spoken word in certain contexts. That I've probably been slow to see this, but I always thought that social media was like the man in the pub saying, I don't like so-and-so, you know, the sort of thing that happens up and down the country, I think, in pubs every day of the week. And they express themselves much more strongly than they really mean. But those words disappeared into the air and nothing came of them. There is something more authoritative about it being written down. Somebody goes to the trouble of writing it down, posts it on social media. And although the initial thought is very similar, I think the effect has made public life in this country less sympathetic.
Do you feel in some way it's like writing down all the most unpleasant things that come almost bumbling out of the unconscious and are there for good until or unless someone deletes them on social media to be then picked up by someone else, and so it goes on?
It has a cumulative effect. And I think it'll be very interesting to listen this evening to the Panorama programme, which has been trailed. And so by the time people listen to this interview, they will know what it's had to say on how the social media companies they mentioned, I think Facebook in particular, if you put something disagreeable about women on, they will then direct you to more sites that are disagreeable about women until you get to sites that suggest violence against women. Now, this is really very troubling, that if the social media's business model is one that actually promotes increasing degrees of unpleasantness, then there's something quite rotten at the heart of social media.
Come to that in a moment, but a question that follows from all this is, have you been affected at all by the abuse you get on social media? You get quite a bit, or is it water off a duck's back?
It is water off a duck's back. I don't read it. And I don't think that social media should be given too serious a rating. But then I grew up prior to the social media world. When I was a teenager, social media wasn't heard about. And I think it may well be different for people who've grown up in a more social media world. Well, my own social media concerns are negligible. But I don't want to lessen the concerns other people have, because I think they may be more justified, and I think the abuse that women, and particularly ethnic minority women, get on social media is of a completely different league from anything that I get.
Do you think it's worse for ethnic minority women on media?
All the evidence seems to suggest that it is. And there's just been a study, hasn't there, on the celebrity shows showing that the greater abuse goes to women over men.
Of course, I said a few moments ago that it's possible that these two recent murders of MPs within the last 10 years have got nothing to do with social media. However, having said that, it's important to put on the record, isn't it, that there are members of the Commons at present, I would think entirely women members, who have had stalkers on social media and have been harassed and have had to have police action.
And it's very important that there is police action that will help them. But yes, there have been very serious instances where people have been threatened. Well, the whole case around Rosie Cooper, which was so terrible.
Do you think it's had an effect on the turnover of MPs? As far as I can see, the turnover does seem to be speeding up, and in particular, when I last looked at the figures, that this is pre-2017, there seemed to be quite a high turnover of women MPs.
I don't know. We've had quite a lot of elections, and with results moving about heavily. So obviously a big turnover in 2010 and another big turnover in 2019. Big turnover, of course, of Labour seats in Scotland in 2015. And this is one of those things that needs to be studied very carefully before one comes to a firm conclusion. I'd be more worried about it deterring people from going into politics in the first place, rather than people, once they've got into politics, deciding not to carry on.
Have you had colleagues here saying to you, I'm going to go, the game is no longer worth the candle, and my family feel strongly that it's just not worth trying to fulfill this vocation, if you like, because the abuse and the threats and the problems for my family are too much?
Nobody has said that to me specifically and directly, but I'm sure families are concerned.
And have you had, picking up on something you said a moment ago, have you had people say to you the other way round about coming in? Have you had people say to you, well, you know, I would have thought about the Commons, but I've just decided that, money aside, I think the game's not worth the candle, and there's too much abuse, there are too many threats, people get hurt, and I don't think it would be fair to inflict that on my family?
Over the years, I've had many conversations with people who are very interested in politics. You must have done the same, who usually classify it in terms of the intrusion that you have to put up with, rather than the physical concern, have felt that therefore they couldn't go into politics. And the intrusion, I think, very much covers the social media abuse. So yes, I think that what has been going on in recent years has lessened the desire of people to go into politics.
And what effect has that had, in your view, if at all, on the quality of the Commons?
I mean, I think you always want to be picking from as large a pool as possible, and you don't want to deter good people from coming in. On the other hand, entry into Parliament is still highly competitive, and most of the time when I'm sitting in the chamber, particularly when I'm answering questions, I'm sitting there thinking how good the people are who are questioning me and how high quality they are.
Do you think it's possible that one might reach a kind of tipping point whereby the number of able people wanting to come in becomes so low that the effect becomes noticeable?
I think it's unlikely. I think that there are people who, for a variety of reasons, want to go into politics, and we could discuss separately the motivations for a political career, but they are a mix of duty and interest and ambition. They're worthy desires people have. But I think that the steps that were taken post the murder of Joe Cox and that will be taken now will help reassure people, at least as to their physical safety. What you can do about intrusion whilst maintaining a free press is a more complicated question.
Let's just talk for a minute about the social media companies, and you've got the online harms bill coming up. I think it's fair to say that, rightly or wrongly, in the aftermath of a horror like this, there's a kind of twitch or impulse to do something which is not, necessarily wrong in itself. But isn't there a limit to the amount that can be done simply by piling duties, sort of regulatory duties, on these companies who you don't really trust to police themselves anyway? I mean, after all, the banning of Donald Trump's account from Twitter, or, the banning of Parler, I think it was seen as expressly political acts by the people who run these companies. So do you really want to be giving them more power to censor and remove comment?
That is the great conundrum, isn't it? That freedom of speech is tremendously important, and you can't outsource freedom of speech. You can't say that Facebook's decision on what is right and proper to say is an absolute authority, because it clearly isn't. On the other hand, you want to try and protect people. I think we should be concerned about the business models and how they look to make their revenues. I think the whistleblower who appeared before Congress within the last fortnight, and admittedly a program I haven't yet seen, the Panorama program that will have been broadcast by the time this podcast goes out, is indicative of problems with that business model. And I think it's much more to do with looking at the business model and that type of regulation. It's more Teddy Roosevelt than it is anybody else. It's looking at monopolistic behavior and what monopolistic behavior can create.
Should one be able simply to sue them if they don't take stuff down? I mean, after all, these companies have been arguing for years that they're a platform and not a publisher. It's very hard to believe that, given the fact that they ban some accounts and don't ban others.
I think you make a very good and strong point. That it to some extent is puzzling that the online companies are not subject to the normal laws of libel. On the other hand, there are risks with the way the ordinary laws of libel restrict free speech in other areas.
Just finally, let's round off with a discussion about MP safety and what, if anything, can be done. I mean, to my way of thinking, actually, what's happening is not one group of the colleagues saying we must have radical change and another group of colleagues saying, well, actually nothing much must change at all. But there's possibly some sort of ground in the middle whereby maybe surgery protection could be stepped up a bit? What do you think?
I think there are always difficulties. I have always been worried in terms of my constituency surgeries, not about who comes, but about who doesn't come. And it's always seemed to me the people who don't come are probably the people who need my help most, that they are the most desperate, they are the most in need. And either they don't know that the MP is available to help them, or they think going to the MP is a very big thing to do. And anything that is an obstacle to that worries me, because over 11 years, I've had people come to see me to complain about the police. Do they really want to come and see me if there's a policeman standing at the entrance? The policeman won't be in the surgery, but of course will recognise or may recognise the person coming in. And this is really difficult. How do you make things more secure without deterring the most vulnerable? And the other question I'd raise is it's not all about surgeries. Most MPs now live in their constituencies, are part of their community. And I thought Eleanor Lang put this very clearly when she said, when she's queuing for fish and chips, she is still a member of Parliament. And we can't have members of Parliament not leading the lives that they need to lead. On the other hand, they have to be secure. So what do you do? Well, there are steps you can take that help with surgeries, like an appointment system. I actually don't tell people where my surgery is being held in advance, because some idiot environmentalists wearing masks came along to one of them, to the great distress of my other constituents, who suddenly found these black-clad people wearing masks standing outside the surgery, and that's not fair on people who are very vulnerable. So I now tell people where my surgeries are when they make the appointment, rather than advertising them in the paper beforehand. So there are little things you can do that actually make things safer. I think it's important that MPs' homes and offices are safe. And that's because in most constituencies, people know where the MP lives. It's not a state secret. But there is a risk that it's very hard to avoid, that MPs not only need, but want to be out and about in their constituencies. They want to go to the shops, they want to go to church, they want to go to village fetes with their children, all the things that MPs do. They want to do their appointments. And you cannot provide bodyguards to 650 MPs. So it's a question of seeing what you can do, making that as effective as possible, but recognising that there is an element of risk in life.
So on surgeries, for example, you clearly don't believe that the whole bang shoot, or indeed even a substantial part of it, could be done on Zoom, for example, because a percentage of your constituents and other people's constituents won't be on the net in the first place.
I didn't like doing remote surgeries. I think the personal connection with one's constituents is very important. But some MPs will make another choice. I don't think there's only one way of doing things, but I don't think one should focus entirely on surgeries. That MPs do so many other things other than surgeries, and are visible in so many other ways, and must be visible. I mean, they can't avoid being visible in their constituencies. And this isn't just what they want to do; it's just the nature of the job. And so, yes, some people may think in terms of their risk balance that online surgeries will suit them better. Others will say, no, I feel that the face-to-face interaction is crucial. I feel with the face-to-face interaction that I have a much better understanding of what the constituent's real problem is. And I've been fascinated over the years by how many people come to see me to talk about, I don't know, COVID, Brexit, whatever. They haven't really come to talk to me about that at all. They've come to talk to me about a very specific problem that they have. And it's only after they've been in conversation with me for a few minutes about something that has opened the door that they get on to what it is that they really want to talk about. And I think that's much harder to do remotely. But that's my choice. That's my understanding of how these things work. I absolutely understand that other MPs will feel that it is more efficient and equally capable to do it with remote means.
Is a way of thinking about it that it's probably true that 50 years ago there were more Conservative MPs in particular, I imagine, who were absentee landlords. And even now, though there will be some who have second homes in their constituencies and live mainly in London, but there has been an overwhelming trend as voters quite rightly get more choosy and vote less on the basis of class and more on the basis of choice. There's been a trend to become the local member. And as you say, MPs, they don't only hold surgeries, but they're members of clubs, they're members of charities, their children sometimes go to local schools, their spouses are in the constituency during the week when they're here at Westminster. I mean, ultimately, for all the correct instincts about improving safety, you can't be like the man in the cartoon who's surrounded by a bubble. You know, and when it rains, he doesn't get wet. And when the sun shines, he doesn't get warm. He's completely insulated from the world around him. MPs ultimately just cannot be like that, can they?
No, I think that's absolutely right. But nor would they want to be. That it's the same with the police. Peel's famous line about "we are the police and the police are us." MPs are in the same position. They are part of their community. But it's the most rewarding bit of what I do as a Member of Parliament. That you know, Somerset, my own county, representing my own county and the people of my county in Parliament, is what it's all about. And so being part of that community is fundamental. Being detached from it or hidden away from it would make it much harder to do what I want to do.
Just a last question. Actually, it's a quote from something George Osborne said on Twitter, where he said, MPs are now on the front line of public service. Do you think that's right?
Well, I think they, in a way, always have been. I think that democratic accountability is fundamental. During the discussions on who was a key worker during COVID, I always argued that MPs were key workers, that if being democratically represented was not fundamental to how our country was run, then you didn't really believe in democracy. So I think George Osborne has said something that is true, but not novel.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
The Moggcast, a fortnightly conversation with Jacob Rees-Mogg about the topics of the day.